proceed. Charles works with his directors to advance Article 5 single-issue amendment conventions through the state legislatures, bypassing Congress, the courts, and executive branch. He has been an Article 5 advocate for 41 years. During the last 7 years, his focus has been to convene single-issue amendment conventions to restore America's constitutional republic and heritage. Presently, Citizen Initiatives has been securing applications from state legislature, directing Congress to convene the Countermand Amendment Convention. He has been recognized by Entrepreneur magazine for founding one of America's top 500 entrepreneurial companies, and has been awarded the coveted Authority Author title by the e-zine directories. Charles has authored and published multiple position papers: The Unborn Child Amendment, The 11th Nation, and Reclaiming America Through Single-Issue Federal Conventions. He hosts a weekly radio broadcast on patriotsride.org and has been the guest speaker on hundreds of radio, TV shows, and local regional special events. He has lobbied Congress twice to override President Clinton's 2 vetoes of the late-term abortion bill, and has received support for his work from U.S. senators, U.S. representatives, and state legislators. He has served in the church as a preacher, lay pastor, elder, deacon, teacher, jail ministry director, and youth director. Charles has been married to his first love for 49 years. He has 2 sons and 7 grandchildren. He is a graduate of California State Government Political Science and has 4.5 years of postgraduate work at Loyola, I think I'm saying that right, Law School, and Moody Bible Extension Studies. He also served honorably in the U.S. Navy. And Charles, I'd like to thank you for your service and commend you for 49 years. Wow.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that compliment. Actually, it's 51 years now.
Oh, wow.
That bio was a couple years old.
Okay. So
thank you for commending me.
Oh,
and, we have been married 51 years, and I can't imagine ever being married to anyone else, to be honest. But at the same time, we have a lot of fun. I joke around with my wife a lot. I actually tease her ever since she's been just a young lady. When I first married her, I was a prankster with her, and I never changed. And so it keeps humor in our family.
Oh, yeah, you have to have that, I think.
Mike, I don't know where you want me to go with the presentation, or at least the information that I'm going to share. If anyone in your audience is interested in calling in, of course, I would welcome their calls if you can handle them.
Okay.
On the other hand, I am the executive director for Citizen Initiatives and the Countermand Amendment, and we presently have 26 states sponsoring the amendment, meaning that there are legislators who are pushing our Countermand Amendment under Article 5 through the committees and onto the floor this year. Actually, this week, we should get 2 very important decisions in Alaska in the financial committees. But tomorrow I work with a senator from North Carolina. I have lunch with him. We've got some very important people down in Louisiana who help us. North Dakota, South Dakota, Texas. I've met with not only legislators but also with the key governors, the governor's key policy directors who are working on our material as we speak. I've had 3 meetings with them already. Pennsylvania is actually pushing the amendment through the legislature as we speak, going through the government committees. I met with them at length just about 3 or 4 months ago, and they were quite impressed. And they actually had rejected a competitor, well, not really a competitor, but another Article 5 advocacy group, COS, or Convention of States. They had rejected them for reasons that we may want to get into later. But the fact is, when they heard about us, they said, this is the answer. So we've had a lot of good experiences. We've had some heartaches. The amendment is going forward as we speak in Montana, Utah, Arizona, and some questionable states as to whether they'll get through this year or not. Include, New Mexico, West Virginia, Ohio, New Hampshire. Everything is based on the timing of their schedules, and that means that we really, in that sense, are at the mercy of the legislators and their political views. Most of them do not understand how important the Countermand Amendment is. But after they hear what we have to say, and I'll try to do my best here tonight on this radio broadcast, when they hear what we have to say, they almost always turn heads and say, wow, we didn't know that. So it's important that we get our message out. At the center of our message is the one word that is most important to all of us, and that is sovereignty. Unfortunately, in America, because we are an egalitarian culture, sovereignty just doesn't seem to be all that important. We like to find compromise and equality as the ways in which to conduct ourselves in our governments. But sovereignty is important, and sovereignty is the reason that we can restore our constitutional republic through Article 5. So that's a little preliminary information, Mike, that might be helpful to you and to your listeners.
Okay, would you like to explain a little bit what the Article 5 counter amendment is?
I would be glad to.
I'm
Can
sorry.
you hear me well?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I would be glad to. Article 5, first of all, is it's the most powerful article in the United States Constitution. It allows the state legislatures to amend the Constitution either through proposals by 2/3 of both houses in Congress or by 2/3 of the state legislatures directing Congress to convene a convention. And when the amendment is approved by the body that's in question, whether it be Congress or members of the convention, it then goes back to the states for ratification. Once it's ratified, it becomes part of our Constitution. Now, the reason I say it's the most powerful part of the Constitution is because the state legislators alone are the final arbiters in all constitutional matters in America, though most of them don't know that. They are, in fact, statesmen, not just politicians, because they're actually able to steer the direction of our constitutional republic. And there has been a terrible, terrible history in the last 40-some years of anti-Article 5 groups that have paralyzed the legislators, but we can address those in a little bit. But the Countermand Amendment itself is a single-issue amendment being proposed through state legislatures and through what we expect will be the Countermand Amendment Convention. We need 34 state legislatures to make applications on Congress to convene the convention, or to call it, and then at that point the delegates that are sent to the states are assigned tasks. We regard those tasks as ambassadorships, and they wind up deciding whether or not a particular amendment should be sent back to the states for ratification. We're in that process. Unfortunately, there's been a tremendous amount of misinformation about the Article 5 process and what it is. Over the years, at least the last 40 years, there have been many groups out there that have muddied the water so badly that it has made our job many, many times more difficult in helping to explain the power that the citizenry has through their elected officials in Article 5. All of the Article 5 groups out there, and the anti-Article 5 groups, and there are a handful of them, probably less than maybe 5 or 6, they all have started with a very flawed assumption. And that assumption is that Article 5 can only allow the convening of a constitutional convention. The idea is that delegates will then go to the convention and do whatever they want, and as a result, because of their flawed thinking, they have the power to make changes to the Constitution irrespective of the wishes of the people or the state legislatures. And so some anti-Article 5 groups latch onto this, trying to put fear in the hearts of these legislators to prevent them from using Article 5. In my book, Countermand Amendment, The Missing Piece in the Article 5 Puzzle, I tried to clarify this and identify these anti-Article 5 groups who in fact have caused a mess in the effort on the part of many well-meaning patriots to restore our republic through Article 5. So when we are now looking at how Article 5 is to be used, to us it's a very simple matter, but to them it's a very complicated matter. And they believe that somehow the delegates are, in an Article 5 constitutional convention, are going to be responsible for decisions that the legislatures can't control. Our position is quite different. We tell them that Article 5 is an amendment convention. It says so twice in the article itself. It says it's for proposing amendments. I don't know why they missed that. It says for proposing amendments twice, so the founders know how important it is for the article to be used to amend the Constitution, not to have wholesale changes. And so given that understanding, we are explaining to the legislatures that they are the ones who are in control. The elected, accountable representatives of the people are responsible for a convention and how it's to be conducted, and they're responsible for the text. We did not elect delegates to decide what an amendment should be. We elected state legislators. And that means that if the legislatures advocate that authority and give it to delegates, or even if they allow Congress to play politics with it, which is one of the fears that these Article 5 groups have, but we have a way to stop even Congress. But at any rate, if they allow Congress to have a say, or the governor, or the Supreme Court in the Article 5 process, then the supremacy authority that presently rests in state legislatures will be lost. And the other Article 5 groups and their concept that it's a constitutional convention will win, and they will muddy the waters up so that for generations, future legislators will find it impossible to use Article 5 efficiently because it will have been so politicized, and they'll be mired in legal cases in courts for decades to come. So there's some real serious issues that are involved, and the Countermand Amendment is an amendment that actually is for the purpose of restoring our republic through state legislatures. Now, I guess what I should do, Mike, is to explain a little about sovereignty and why sovereignty is so critical.
Well, if you could, I have had a couple questions come in that you might want to answer before you get into that.
Please do.
Okay.
I'll be glad to try.
Okay. We're on YouTube, so that's where I'm getting these questions at in our YouTube chat. So, okay. And the first question is what if you live in a state with corrupt politicians in the state legislature?
All right. I must tell the caller or the writer that every state has corrupt politicians. You're not going to find one that doesn't.
I live in Illinois, so...
But that's not the point. The point is there are many, many honorable men and women who are trying to restore our republic. I am treated extremely well by these legislators in the states. In Oklahoma, for an example, one of our sponsors out there asked me to go in. He had his aide escort me into the legislature, the House, while in a live session. And he sat me up on the balcony facing the legislators. And he said, I want to introduce you to everybody because the work you're doing is that important. And he did. And I was there for 2 days, and they respected me terribly. Texas, they had a tremendous respect. One of the policy directors in the meeting I had down there was simply this, that is the policy director for the governor. Although the governor has no say in the Article 5 process, they still can support it. And he said, Texas will approve this, Charles. But these are just some incidences. I had tremendous experiences in Utah and North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. Pennsylvania was a tremendous experience with respect shown to me by the representatives and the senators. You see, when they come to understand how they can do their job which up until recently has not been clear to them, then they realize they have a responsibility that they can preserve this republic. If we lose this republic, you know, the federal government is not a democracy. The federal government is a republic, and thank God for that, because it's not based on the population that issues of federalism are approved. It's based on the idea that every state has equal standing, as in Article 4, Section 4 guarantees, and that every state has one vote. So you could have 500,000 people, you could have 40 million like in California, but the populations of those states won't decide the issue. One vote per state will at the federal level through Article 5. Now, the addressing, to answer more specifically the idea of corrupt people in the legislatures, there are quite a few. There are some people you can talk to till you're blue in the face, and they just look to you with a blank expression, realizing that they have been brainwashed with an ideology that doesn't make any sense, and yet to them it's the only thing that matters. And we have counters to that, but oftentimes we don't get very far with them. But there are very few of them. I would say 85% is probably a good number, maybe 90% of the state legislators, senators, and representatives who we speak with respect us and respond well to us and become supporters of ours. So I don't think that we need to fear the corruptness in the state legislatures. The other thing is, the reason why the republic is so important is because with the Countermand Amendment, once it's ratified, it will only take 30 state legislatures to countermand any law or ruling that is encroaching on state rights and personal liberties to have it rescinded. So that means the smaller states' rights states and the larger state rights states, and certainly the more conservative states, are going to be a lot easier to secure countermands from than, let's say, California. Now, on the other hand, it is bipartisan, so it can be used in other ways. But I recently had a conversation with a Democrat representative in Louisiana, and he, after hearing what the Countermand Amendment is, and he then said he would not hinder the work in Louisiana. He may not be able to support it because of his politics. At any rate, so he said, but who's sponsoring it here? And I told him. He says, oh, I know so-and-so. Senator, he's a wonderful man, and so forth and so on. And he says, but we always vote differently. We never vote the same. He says, I'm always concerned about minority rights, and he's concerned about other issues dealing with conservative politics. And he said, so we can't get together. And I said, let me ask you something, Representative so-and-so. I said, are you not concerned about preserving and protecting the states' rights of Louisiana in the United States Republic? He says, yeah. Okay, I said, well, Senator so-and-so is also concerned, and he wants to do that as well. I said, now let me ask you one more question. Are you not interested in protecting the personal liberties of your citizens in Louisiana? He says, yeah. I said, well, Senator so-and-so wants to do that also. So now you have a tool in the Countermand that will allow you to accomplish the things that you are concerned with. You just need to work out how it's to apply. But you see, it's not a political issue anymore. Now it's an issue of our inalienable rights and our states' rights. That's what it's an issue about. And when there is encroachment on those rights, they can be addressed with the Countermand and they can be rescinded. So at any rate, the writer in that question, I would caution not to be too concerned about corruption. There's always going to be corruption. But we do have a lot of favorable, very honorable men and women in the legislatures across the country.
Okay, and I do have another question for you. Actually, there's a few of them here. One of the concerns, I'm sure, with many individuals is what if they would use the Article 5 power to, say, amend the Constitution to take, like, the Second Amendment or, say, the First Amendment or anything like that? What if they would do that, or are they limited to where they can't?
Well, again, I started out by telling you that there were anti-Article 5 groups and other pro-Article 5 groups that have made the assumption that Article 5 is, in fact, the Constitutional Convention. The idea that they use is that at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, the founders, who were the delegates, had pretty well the freedom to do whatever they wanted at the convention. But their job was different. Their job was to create a new government, a new constitution, and then, as a result, a new republic that would protect and preserve the states and provide for the states as needed. And so these founders had an entirely different role than an Article 5 Amendment Convention delegate. Today, under Article 5, and because people have been thinking about it being a constitutional convention equivalent to 1787, they attach Article 5 to that. But it's flawed. It's bad thinking. It's terrible thinking, as a matter of fact. And it's been paralyzing the legislators for 40-some years. But you see, the Article 5 delegate isn't going as a free agent. He is going to that legislature, to that convention, in our case, the Countermand Amendment Convention, as an ambassador of his legislature. And that means he's given an assignment to do a specific task. He's not there to rewrite the Constitution. Actually, Article 5 is to enable us to preserve the Constitution, and the Countermand Amendment is the tool that the states can use to do just that. With the Countermand Amendment, the fact is that the Constitution is not changed. All of the rights that are in it right now stay the same. But here's the point. The delegate under the Article 5 Constitution Amendment Convention is an ambassador. He's not a free agent. He doesn't go to do his own will. He goes to do the will of the people through their elected state legislators. That's why he goes that's why he is appointed. And so when you start out with this other assumption, that is that he goes as a free agent, and it's a constitutional convention, you get everything mixed up. You see, we already had our Constitution Convention. We don't need another one. Article 5 was put in the Constitution to preserve it. It was not put there to create a new Constitution. So the idea that it's equivalent to the 1787 Convention is really simply nuts. And yet they've gotten out of hand. We've got many scholars today that believe that's the case. They've got many who believe that it's a constitutional convention, can't be controlled, and so forth. All of that is crazy. And the reason it's crazy is because when you understand sovereignty in the people through state legislatures, none of that can happen. And so let's assume now that we have 34 states who make application on Congress to convene the Countermand Amendment Convention. Now, those 34 states now send delegates. Congress will summon probably 535 delegates to the convention. That will be the process that will be used. They'll be politically charged delegates if they're not controlled. So Congress summons the delegates, and then the states decide who they want to send. But before they send them, with the Countermand Amendment and delegate resolution that we have as part of the Countermand Amendment strategy, the delegates are contractually bound to the will of the legislatures to do exactly what they say. And they don't have the latitude of convening the convention in a way that's comfortable for them. They only convene it according to the will of their legislatures, which are who are reflecting the will of the sovereign people. That's the point. I guess a little history will help. 1787, believe it or not, the biggest problem that the delegates at that convention had, even before deliberations on the Constitution started, was sovereignty. The bigger states, and there were 13 states, the bigger states wanted all the voting at the convention to be based on the population of the states. That sounds like the Democrats today. And then the little states, they said, no, we don't want that. We want voting at the convention to be one vote per state. This was a big, big problem. And so they put a man in charge by the name of George Wythe, who was a delegate, a lawyer, professor of law. He was a distinguished gentleman. In a committee they asked him to head up a committee to establish the rules for the convention, even before it started. And he did. And one of the key rules that he proposed was that every state would have one vote. And that was not easily settled. There was more wrangling that went on, but they finally settled for one vote per state, and we wound up having a Republican convention. Republican simply means that each individual state has its own authority to the degree that it surrenders some of that authority to the federal government, notwithstanding, but the fact is that they are autonomous governments with certain authorities and rights that they can do that the government should not be able to interfere with. And as a result, the Constitutional Convention became a Republican convention for the reasons that it was going to be one vote per state. Now, that same rule has to be determined at every Article 5 convention. Article 5 was put together in a very simple form. It's vague, but what the founders wanted, they wanted the sovereignty they had to be passed on to future legislatures so that they would have the authority to modify the conduct of the federal government through amendments. And they wanted to do this in a safe way, so that's why they inserted for proposing amendments. They didn't put in it for delegates to decide. They didn't say in Article 5 that it's a constitutional convention. They said it was for the specific purpose of proposing amendments. That's the authority that the legislatures have. Now, it is true the legislatures could change that if they wanted to, but they would have to do so by proposing an amendment. So they would have to send out a proposed amendment to the states, and they would have to say, look, we don't want 3/4 of the states anymore to ratify a constitution. We want 2/3. And now everybody would have to agree with that, or at least 3/4 of them at this point. And the answer to that is, it's a proper way of doing it, but it won't happen, because just about everybody doesn't want to change the Constitution. We don't. We want to protect it. So in 1787, we had this terrible, terrible problem of how to solve sovereignty. Voting was one issue. There was another issue, and that issue had to do with how to amend the Constitution, the new one that they were creating. They knew that the future, they did not know what issues future legislators would have to deal with. And so they left a lot of vagueness in what it says, but they left the sovereign authority that they have to do it through proposing amendments in place. So there were three things that the founders wanted for us today. And I would that these other guys would understand this. It's so simple. One, they wanted that the Constitution would be the supreme law of the land. Two, they wanted it to be into perpetuity, so that every generation going on into the very distant future would be able to use this Constitution for their own benefits to protect their own states' rights and inalienable rights. And then three, they wanted to be used safely so that it wasn't a wholesale convention. The convention process would not be a wholesale method by which to ruin the Constitution. So they inserted the limiting words for proposing amendments. Now, when the states today understand that, which is what they're doing through us, when they understand that, and then they understand that our delegate resolution is really the contract that tells their delegates how to behave themselves and what to do at the convention, then the convention is safe. When 26 states agree to that delegate resolution, it's a safe, quick, and successful convention. I think the convention could be over in 7 to 10 days. We don't need a long down, drag-out convention with a year or 2 years. Some of these other groups are proposing subjects that, well, one of the other groups, and I think it's going to be 2-3 years before they get it done. I mean, it's just going to be subjects, sub-subjects, and now they've got 535 politically charged delegates. They're going to what they think is a modified constitutional convention, and you've got 55 delegates coming from California, you've got 5 from Wyoming, and they haven't even decided how they were going to vote. That's the kind of nuts that's in this thing. And so if you have a delegate resolution binding the delegates as ambassadors, not free agents, you've got the proper way of using Article 5, and because it's not a constitutional convention, it's an amendment convention, the people win. And the people now have a way to preserve their inalienable rights and states' rights.
Well, we have a someone that's commenting, wondering about And I think it's apples and oranges is what this is going to be. But you were talking about each state gets one vote, and they're referring to like the electoral votes, and wondering, about whether or not in this situation, whether, like some states would have more votes than other states, or is that apples and oranges?
Yeah, it is apples and oranges. The Electoral College is an entirely different animal, and it's primarily for the election of the president. And again, what the founders wanted to do is to provide a cushion so that the majority could be, in some fashion, prevented from but dominating the minority. And so the Electoral College was a tool that they invented in order to accomplish some things that today, in our egalitarian culture and at the instigation of Democrats, it's an evil thing. I don't think it's evil, because it's divided government. That's the whole purpose of our republic. But on the other hand, when it comes to voting at a convention, under Article 5, whether it be for the calling of the convention and or voting at the convention, one vote per state is all you get. Doesn't matter how many Electoral College people might be involved. There won't be any Electoral College people, but I mean the process that's used in the Electoral College will have nothing to do with it. The key here is, again, state legislature sovereignty through we the people. Once that delegate resolution with a pre-approved text for the amendment is approved by that state legislature, those delegates will go to the Countermand Amendment Convention bound, one, to the text, and two, to the procedures, including making sure it's a Republican form of convention, and two, that it's a simple majority vote in order to get the thing approved. And with that, and of course the delegate resolution has in it the pre-approved text. So when you have 26 state legislatures agreeing to that in some form, and we're going to have far more than 26, by the way. We'll probably have as many as as many as states make the application, 34. We'll probably have 34 delegate resolutions. But it's the proper tool that the state legislatures need to control the Article 5 process into the near future, so they can address literally any problem that the states have. And the citizenry, with our Countermand Amendment, is actually going to be in a position to call up their state legislatures and say, look, we've got a problem. There's some federal encroachment on our Second Amendment rights, or there's some federal encroachment on water rights, or some other issue dealing with education, and or the IRS, or energy issues, or some social issues like traditional marriage, and we're being violated here. And so now their state legislature, not their congressman, their state legislature will be able to start the ball rolling. And he then will present that complaint for that particular law or ruling that's offensive to his people, and it will go to what probably will be called a Countermand Legislative Committee. They then will decide if it has merit, and then once they agree to countermand it, and they do so by notifying the federal government that they are pushing that amendment back. Actually, countermands are a form of nullification, but it has no teeth yet. So then what happens is the legislative committees receive notice from the initiating state, the original state, and when 30 state legislatures agree that that law or ruling has to be countermanded, it's rescinded automatically. So the federal government can no longer enforce it. But the people can initiate that with the Countermand Amendment, which right now they can't do anything. And the federal and the state legislatures can't do anything because the supremacy clause in the Constitution prevents the states from doing anything that the federal government has mandated or contrary to it. So the idea that the one vote per state is tremendously important. We have to retain our republic, and we have to retain the individual character of our states. Texas is totally different from Louisiana. North Dakota has an totally different culture than South Dakota even. New Jersey is different from Arizona. And every state has a very unique character. And those characteristics make up the whole, and it's the whole that makes us a great people as Americans. And if we want the federal government to overrule us and everything and just ride over us, ramshot, I guess it is. The fact is that we will become like whatever the people at the top want us to be. And that's what they're trying to do right now. That's their strategy, especially those on the left.
Right.
They are trying very hard to get the states to succumb to the will of the federal government.
Right, and they're changing.
We can stop that with the Countermand Amendment.
And it seems like they're changing the whole premise of the way this country is supposed to operate. They're trying to make it seem as if it's mob rule is what controls the laws and stuff in this country, and it's simply not. It's supposed to be protection of our individual rights, not whoever's got the biggest amount of or loudest people.
Well, that's true, and you know, we've become almost anarchic here in the last 20 years. I've been watching the deterioration of our culture now for, I don't know, maybe when I was in law school in '69, I remember walking into that class and seeing the composition of students that were there and knew there was something wrong. And now the culture was going to start changing. And from there, we got the anti-war crowd that caused us to get out of Vietnam and lose that. When I was in the military, our job was to push the communists back because of the Cold War. And we did an awfully good job. We've never been recognized for it. I mean, I traveled all over the Atlantic Ocean chasing Russian trawlers and Russian submarines and onboarding parties and worked through the night through coding systems. And if I did anything like Hillary did today, recently, they'd have me in prison and I would have been shot because with my clearances. But my point is, though, that was an important period, and the American people were being protected because in the 20th century, it has been estimated that as many as 150 million people have been murdered by communists. And at least 100 million, but I think it's probably closer to 150 between Russia and China and Southeast Asia and many other, Africa. I mean, the communists have made havoc of this nation, of the world, I should say, and have tried very hard to upset our nation. And they did it in the 60s with the anti-war screams going on with Vietnam. And that was part of the reason why the hippies and the beatniks and the flower power people and the LSD heads all had this terrible attitude or understanding that we were the bad guys. We were really trying to push back the communists from taking over another nation. That's all we were. And so that's neither here nor there. The point is, we are a nation that has tremendous history. Unlike any other nation in the world, God has favored us tremendously, and we've always had an ideal purpose. But when you destroy the foundations, you know, one of the key scriptures is, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? That's what these communists and leftists have been doing. And the Democratic Party has picked their logic up, their illogic up. They have adopted many of their thoughts and their thinking so as to get voting blocks. And as a result, today they are a divergent party with hardly any white men in it, and they have mostly minorities that are taught how to hate white people. I mean, that's the result of the 60s. And it never stops, and they've killed 50 million babies at the same time. Mm-hmm. So we're in terrible shape in America. And that's why we have to restore this republic, and why the Countermand Amendment has to be ratified.
Well, there was another question, and I'm curious about it too. And maybe, I don't know if maybe we've all been told wrong, or if we're right, and maybe this is an attempt to fix that issue. But this goes into sovereignty. Somebody asked how we could have sovereignty if with England running our justice system under maritime law.
Yeah, that's an argument that doesn't make any sense. The fact is that some have claimed that there's a corporation that was created by Congress in 1871, and it has become the new Constitution and so forth. You misunderstand what sovereignty is. You see, our Constitution guarantees that we the people, remember the first three words in the Constitution, we the people, that we can alter the Constitution and modify it at will. We are the sovereign agents. Sovereignty didn't come from Congress. It doesn't come from Supreme Court rulings. It comes from the people. And when we elect state legislatures, they are our sovereign representatives in combating federal encroachment and federal
violations of our personal liberties. And so whatever has happened since the inception of our Constitution, which I think was like in 1791, or just shortly before that when it was finally ratified, but eventually it was ratified by everybody, I think by 1791. But the point is, whatever has happened since then is not based on the surrender of our sovereign will, our sovereign authority, and we the people. That has never changed. And as long as we have it, and we have Article 5, we have a sovereign nation through we the people. And therefore, these other issues can be stopped. And they can be stopped in our case with the Countermand Amendment. You know, if we knew how to use the Article 5 process effectively before the Civil War, we could have, in my opinion, we could have solved that war without the bloodshed. 620-some thousand young men lost their lives, and plus millions, thousands, hundreds of thousands more that were mutilated. But the point is, we could have solved it peacefully through the Article 5 process and without having to secede from the Union, because the states are sovereign under Article 5. And therefore, there could have been an orderly process. But they didn't think that way. They didn't even understand that. And to the contrary, they just thought they had and they do that today. We have many on the right that are yelling, we got to get up and shoot things up, and, you know, we'll teach them a lesson, and we'll blow them up, and they're going to be sorry, and we've got 100 million guns, and they're just not going to understand that they can't win. Well, that's not what we don't have to do that today. We have Article 5. We have Article 5 to do it peacefully, so that secession is not needed, so that revolution is not needed. That's how powerful our Constitution is. I believe it has been God-inspired. I really honestly do. And I think that the founders were geniuses when they came up with Article 5 to provide a safe way for future generations to address egregious wrongs that they were suffering and federal encroachment. And I can't say enough of what they accomplished by writing it the way they did and get it. But unfortunately, men twist things. And they take words and they make words to sound like something else. And when they do that, they almost always get a lot of adherents who are somewhat mindless, maybe clueless, and they think that's a good idea, and then they adhere to it, and all of a sudden it becomes the law, the rule, the truth, and that's what people live, and they deny themselves their best that God gave us in this Constitution. And so we've got to be careful. We have to. We are guardians of the most powerful governing document in the nation. This Constitution is second to none. Not in every way is it to be used. It can be used perfectly because it isn't. The circumstances are always changing. Slavery was an example, for an example. But eventually, it allowed for slavery to be corrected. So. I would just caution the audience to realize we are sovereign. As a result, we don't, under Article 5, we don't have to succumb to anything.
Well, and
whether it's a structure or a Supreme Court ruling, when the states ratify an amendment, the Supreme Court has to obey it. When the states ratify an amendment, Congress and the states and the regulatory agencies and the IRS and they all have to obey it. That's our Constitution. But what we have lost is the ability to, no, we've never really understood the ability that we have as we the people to protect this Constitution and to advance single amendments pre-approved by legislatures so we can have an elected representative at the convention, but also so we can have a safe and successful convention to address these egregious wrongs, and quickly.
And I think I can and maybe explain something, because I'm following what you're saying. I get what you're saying, and a lot of our listeners came about during the Oregon standoff. Well, they call it a standoff. I don't call it a standoff, but a lot of them came from there. And I was just going to remind them that, you know, Ammon Bundy and Pete Santilli and Lavoy Finicum, they all were trying to explain to us that the Constitution is not a complicated thing. It's a very simple thing. And what we have to remember is our education system and entertainment and everything around us has made it seem like some type of really complex thing that we can't understand. And I think maybe that's what people are having a problem with grasping, is just how simple it really is. Are you there? Oh, hang on just a second.
Okay, I've got you. I had my phone on mute here.
Oh, okay.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Civics has always been important in our educational system. And I remember back in the 50s, civics was a very important subject all through grammar school and going into high school. And again, the left, Mao Zedong said, "You allow me to train up a young child and I'll make him a great communist." I'm paraphrasing him. The point is, he understood that when you take a young mind, he can be trained to believe anything you want. That Hitler and the Nazis, they trained millions of men and women in Germany to believe that the Nazi government, in its socialist form, in its totalitarian form, was the best thing in the world. Stalin, through fear, having killed maybe 40 million Russians, installed a government that was based on lies that he pounded into the heads of their people, and if they didn't follow it and do it and believe it, they were annihilated. And the same thing for Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong, he simply said in the 30s, he said, if it takes half of the population of China to successfully build a communist government in China, he would be willing to do it. Well, there were 600 million people in China at that time. That means he was willing to sacrifice 300 million of his people just to install communism. And they believed communism. They still do today. And the only difference is he didn't murder 300 million. He murdered maybe closer to 70 or 80 million. So we're talking about some horrendous problems that human beings have when we are not educated properly. And if we don't understand truth, and if we don't understand righteousness, and if we don't understand our Christian history, and if we don't understand the importance of America from the standpoint of human values, inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then we don't deserve this Constitution. We're just a bunch of fools. The Lord said in Matthew, he said, "Wisdom is known by her children." I've often thought about that scripture, and I get to thinking, wisdom is known by her children. What did the Lord mean? It meant that the fathers of these kids and the grandfathers, because they were fools and unrighteous, they created the mess that the children had at his generation. And that's the same today. And our nation started to fall down in the early 60s. When I came back from the military and the Cold War, and I was in California going to school in California at the time, Cal State, I couldn't believe the people who hated the military. I mean, I was not respected by hardly anybody. And they all wanted me to join their anti-war movement. And I sat back, I said, don't they understand what they're doing? They have no concept of how important America is. We were the only nation on the planet that could have stopped Hitler in the Second World War, and Japan, and the communists in the Cold War. We were the only nation that could have done that. And if we didn't do it, today we'd be speaking German.
Are you particularly worried where we stand today with wow it really concerns me with everything going on. I don't personally think that we have the defense or I think Reagan did a really good job with his foreign policy, and it's almost like I see the opposite going on right now. And we keep poking at countries like Russia and China that do have very, very strong militaries still. And it seems like our military has been weakened over the, actually, I would say over the past two administrations, without doubt. Would you agree with that, or?
I think I would agree with that. And ever since Eisenhower said the military-industrial complex, that gave the left a mantra that they have been pushing for a long time. And there are many in now the Republican Party who have as much of a concern. But if you have a good moral foundation, which we are losing, and that in our case it was based on Christian values, if you have a good moral foundation, then your military will reflect those values. And you don't need to fear the military in the same way that you would fear Nazis or communists. But when you throw the value system out, and then you throw the family out, especially you destroy the authority of the man, when you start doing those things, you make the nation defenseless to anything that the enemy throws at us. Because we believe anything then. And you just come up with some kind of statement, make it sound like it's a reasonable argument, and all of a sudden it becomes the mantra for the intellectual community. And the political community doesn't take long to pick it up. So, but the value system is what has been lost. I mean, you can't murder 50 million babies in the womb and make it sound like it's a choice. This thing just recently with Trump and his correct statement that if a woman, once Roe versus Wade has been removed and it's now illegal to have an abortion, he said then the woman should be judged if she aborts the baby and suffer a judgment. I agree with that. I mean, the Bible is replete with examples of how God protects the unborn child. But at the same time, what right do they have to say that this woman, the mother, can kill the father's child unless he's an accomplice and has no guilt then, and also destroy the heritage of America, and for that matter, God's heritage, because it's a choice, it's a whim. That's absolutely illogical, and to do it without any consequence. Nuts. And so what I'm disappointed with is the pro-life community believes that nonsense, that the woman is not accountable. She's a victim. She's not a victim. She just simply decided she didn't want the baby. And it doesn't matter who wanted her not to have the baby. She's responsible for that decision, and she'll answer to the Lord for it.
Right, and I think that goes back to, everything seems to be going back to us as an individual. You know, that's that whole sovereignty thing, whether it's something that's moral, whether it's something like you were saying, that if we are stronger as individuals, we will have a stronger military. And that makes total sense to me because, you know, the military is a group of individuals. So, I mean, I've been saying that along the lines of everything in life. We have to start first within ourselves, and we have to deal with the things in ourselves that have been, I don't know the way to properly word it. We've really been drugged down. A lot of it's been done, I think, in our media, whether it's, you know, television programming or even the news now.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, Mike. We have been drugged down, dumbed down. We are a people who have lost the ability to think. And I think that we fit that statement that the Lord used, which was simply that you'll know wisdom. Wisdom is known by her children. And that's where we are today. I look around, and I know probably there are some out there that are probably going to be offended by what I'm saying. And I really don't care. My purpose is not to tell them what they want to hear, but my purpose is to tell them what needs to be said so that they can understand the values that we have in America, and we must protect them. And the Countermand Amendment can do that. But I go in. My wife will ask me to go to the mall, or a mall, and I hate going to a mall. And one time she said, "Well, why?" And I said, "Because when I go to the mall, it's like going to a brothel." I said, "Are women are dressed so scantily or with little tight leotards, trying to seduce me to lust after them, or trying to entice women to envy them?" I said, "It's a crazy society that we're in." I remember in the 50s, you'd see a commercial on TV in the early TV days, and you'd have this mother with the husband sitting at the table, the two children, and she'd actually be in a long skirt preparing breakfast for them. And she'd even have high heels on. You see, in those days, my mom's generation, they knew how to blush. They knew how to feel shame. We don't know that anymore. Our women don't know how to blush. They've been dumbed down to the point where the excellences that God has given them as females has been almost completely lost, except for a few. And I thank God for the few, because they are wonderful models. But the point that I'm making is that's part of the value system that we have allowed to happen in America. And you know, Mike, I tell you who I blame for all of this more than anyone else. If you ask me to and you haven't, but I'm going to volunteer it if I might.
You're fine. You're fine.
Who do I really blame for the mess that we're in America and the degeneration, that the decadence that's taken place in the last 40, 50 years? I blame our preachers.
Amen.
You see, the most powerful profession in the country, in the world, are men who speak the Word of God. Because the Word of God, and of all the religions in the world, the Lord has only favored Christians, aside Jews as well, but the fact is, He has only favored Christians and had given Christians the wonderful privilege of having hundreds of millions of Bibles. And when the preacher preaches the truth, and he addresses the whole counsel of God, not just part of it that seems to be tickling the ears of some of the people in the congregation, he actually is establishing morality for the whole country. When I was a teenager, in the 40s and 50s, well, the early 50s, my friends who we would hang out with, or almost, I think all of them were Catholic. And I'm not. I grew up as a Lutheran, and then I became a Baptist and so forth. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, I have a value system that's based on a Protestant ethic. Now, when I look at that composition of professing Christians in the 50s, we never thought of them as being saved or unsaved. We just considered them to be God-fearing. And they, literally all of them, whether they were mobsters or whether they were, just troublemakers on the street corner, they were none of them would disrespect God. I had a Bible study I taught for 5 years in Summit County, Ohio. Had a wonderful ministry. I brought 20-some of my young adults in there as chaplains to disciple the men that we led to the Lord. Now, why I'm bringing this to our attention is when I walked into that cell block with these men, they will almost always stand at attention and call me Reverend. It doesn't matter if they were murderers, they were robbers, molesters, or whatever. They respected me because to them I was representing the Lord. We lost that today. You see, and we lost it because the preachers don't teach the whole counsel of God. They only teach what seems to tickle ears so that they don't get in trouble. And they have to turn around. They have to stop and say, wait, I don't care the cost. We've got to tell our people everything that's in the Bible. It's not just about salvation. It's about walking with God. It's about righteousness. So having said all of this, the point is I do point my finger at the preachers over the last 50 years. And because they were afraid to teach the truth, we're in the mess that we're in today.
And you know, the interesting thing with what you said, I agree with it wholeheartedly. And it seems like you were talking about they do it to tickle the ears and so they don't get in trouble. And I understand that, especially with the whole 501c3 nightmare. But also they do it for, in my opinion, they do it to make money, which goes right back to one of the big no-nos of the Bible and the love of money. And I agree with you totally. I think if there are some out there that are preaching the truth, but it's just a handful. And I try not to be super harsh about it. I'm ordained myself. I try not to be super harsh about it, but I definitely won't back down from the word of the Bible.
Great, and I believe that's the tone of what I'm trying to say as well. But if we lose the righteousness that's in the Bible that no other people on the planet have, that is in the sense of any other religion, we will not restore our republic. I mean that emphatically. We cannot see this nation restored to a God-fearing people again if we do not understand that God's values have to be part of our foundation again. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? You see, the righteous are the believers, and the foundations are the laws that come from righteous thinking and the Bible. And if you destroy them, which we've been doing, we can't do anything. The only reason I have some hope for all of us is that we still have Article 5 and sovereignty in Article 5. If I didn't see that, I would give up. I would just let everything collapse because literally, I would probably join some of these militia groups and start picking up arms and doing what I want to do there. But my point is, we do have hope. We have an answer. The Lord did not give us this Constitution to be pushed aside by the church because of their tax-exempt status or because they believe in a myopic view of their preaching of the gospel. They simply don't understand that you don't surrender your sovereign authority in the Word, which they have, to IRS. And you certainly don't surrender the whole counsel of God by just preaching salvation. You have to preach the whole counsel, which means righteousness, the second part of the gospel, the other two-sided coin. So one goes with the other, and if you don't teach them both, you lose all of them.
Oh, I agree with you. I agree with you totally with that. Okay, well, tell us a little bit more about sovereignty, because that's something I would really like to understand a little bit better. I had asked you something on the phone earlier when we talked, and I had asked you about whether or not there truly was a certain process we had to go through, and you were saying more or less that no, that we were already sovereign. So if you would explain a little bit about that.
Sovereignty is not something. If you have sovereignty and you abdicate it, you don't get it back. We've never abdicated our sovereignty as a free people. We allowed it to be damaged. We've surrendered some of the authority that we are supposed to have with it, but we never surrendered and abdicated sovereignty as an entity. I was once asked by a publisher of a Christian publication to share part of my testimony with him, and part of it was, what is sovereignty? And he wanted to hear what I had to say about it. And I said to him, I said, well, sovereignty is something that's given to you in one fashion or another. If it's not from God, it then is assumed it's from God through some governmental structure. All authority is coming from God anyway. But I said, look, I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I have authority in my family. I am responsible for protecting and providing and sacrificing for my wife and family. I said, but I also have authority to be the head and the ruler in my home, not the dictator, but the ruler. I said, now, that authority didn't come from my wife. She didn't give it to me. And my kids didn't give it to me. But God gave it to me. It's a sovereign thing I have. And it's there because I'm a man with responsibilities in this one family. But every man has the same responsibility. Now, the women, my wife has her own areas of sovereignty that I don't want to ever indulge in or interfere with. But the point is that these are areas given to us by God. And for that reason, we don't have to apologize for them. We don't have to make it sound like it's a political nightmare. Oh, I can only be the head of my family if my wife agrees. That's nonsense. Years back, 50 years ago, my good wife and I had some differences, and we were trying to figure out if we can resolve them. And I had a deep sense that my responsibility and authority in the family was being challenged. And I simply told her, I said, Joyce, I said, you need to understand that centuries ago, there was a man by the name of Joshua, and he stood before the children of Israel, and he said, choose ye this day as to whom you're going to serve, and as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now, he spoke for his wife and his children. I said, nowhere in the Bible do you find that his wife rebelled, nor his children. And yet, he had authority to do that. And I'm telling you that you and I am telling you, we will serve the Lord our will. We're making that same choice. But now you have to decide if you want to honor your husband, because I can't force you to do that. You have to decide if you want this home to be a home that reflects the values of God or the feminists out there in the culture. And thank God, she said, this is where we want to go, and we've had a wonderful marriage ever since. But my point is, sovereignty is something that we don't have to apologize for. Now, in the government that we have, God says all authority is given, that He grants authority to all men, to all governments, I should say. And that's why we should obey that government. I believe there is the condition that it's not communism that's killing people innocently. That's a different kind of government. But the point is, we were blessed with a righteous government right from the very beginning. Not a perfect government, but a righteous government. And God's sovereignty was all over it. And he allowed us to develop into a people and into a government where we, the people, can govern ourselves as sovereigns. And we then can decide the future course of our republic. Now, we're accountable for it. It's not going to happen, it's not going to be something whereby we can just do what we want and it doesn't, consequences don't matter. No, they do matter, and we are going to be responsible. We do it through the electorate. But the point is, we are the ones right now who have that sovereign authority. And we must not abdicate it. We're very close to doing that because the left is trying to convince us that we have to be fair. We have to be democratic. We have to make sure that everything we do is based on the majority approving it. That's not what a republic is. That's not what we, the people representing this republic, is. It's different in a republic, and we, the people, decide what that difference is. And I believe that the Lord had his hands on us as a people and those founders. But even going back further to the Mayflower, and you know, when Williams had Bradford, I think his name, William Bradford, when he had offered that simple prayer in Massachusetts that was for the purpose of committing this land to the Lord, he started the ball rolling. And the outcome of that was the Articles of Confederation, which came later. That was a document that reflected Christ everywhere. And then when I have probably read most of the constitutions of the states, and every one of them has a reference to the Lord in some fashion. Every one. Our history is replete. The Supreme Court in 1898, I think it was, in the Trinity versus U.S. case, Trinity Church, it said that we are a nation, a Christian nation. They made the declaration there. In that decision, we are a Christian nation. You see, the history of things was based on Christian values. And because we're losing it, that sovereignty is being torn away from us, and we'll eventually have a dictator, and that Article 5 will mean nothing.
Right.
And, you know, the New World Order is just around the corner. Dictatorships that tell us what to do and how to govern ourselves and so forth, that's just around the corner. But we can still stop it because we are sovereigns and we the people under Article 5. Very, very important that the people understand that.
Right, and I keep trying to explain to people that pretty much along the lines that we're saying, the crazy thing is they've got people convinced to take their own freedoms away, and I keep telling people that when you create these special interest groups and you go to the government and you demand legislation on these on your particular group, you're actually taking your rights away because you already had them to begin with. And when you do that, you're actually having the government step in and restricting your rights.
Again, I do agree with you too. The fact is, my father-in-law used to say, we need a law, and he'd said regarding some issue that he had, and because he's dead now, and he'd say to his wife, write a letter to our congressman, or write a letter to the Journal and so forth, and let's get a law going. And I said to my wife, I said, Joyce, does he not understand that with every new law we tighten the noose of tyranny around our neck more and more, that we restrict our freedoms and our liberties with that law? I estimated one time federal and state laws, many of them duplicative, but maybe 5 million laws in America. And I was in Mississippi recently, and I inadvertently took my mind off of my driving. I was on a trip to state capitals around the country, and I went over a railroad track, and I didn't see any warning, but I did I didn't slow down. I wasn't speeding. I was doing the speed limit of what they said, but I guess they wanted me to slow down. But the point is, I didn't know the area, and my car bounced up and down, and we went forward, and that was the end of it. Well, up comes a cop car, says it was careless driving, and gave me a ticket. Now, that's a Mississippi law. I had no idea that it was even a law. You know, he could have looked at me in another state and said, look, he probably didn't know this, didn't know that, but let me just stop him and tell him that he has to be careful if he goes over that again. The point is that every state has its own laws, and some of them are duplicative, and some of them are unique to that state, but every one of them we're subject to. And every one takes away our liberties because we don't know how to govern ourselves morally. If we governed ourselves morally rather than statutorially and court decision-wise or court decisions with precedents and so forth, if we were able to do it morally, all of a sudden we wouldn't need 99% of the laws. Remember, the Lord only gave us 10 laws, the 10 commandments. And we could have governed ourselves quite adequate just with 10 commandments. But there are always those, especially the attorneys, that now have complicated things so badly. I was just listening recently to Rabbi Zechariah Sunday, and he was and he's an evangelist and an author, and he was talking about the scriptures and the Mishnah and the Talmud. Now, I am not an expert or a student of this, so I'm not talking from expertise, but here's the gist of what he had in mind. It started out with some simple statements in the scriptures dealing with God's laws. From there, the Jews, the scribes, the Pharisees, they decided that they needed to be explained, and so they created 60-some chapters in the Mishnah that was for the purpose of explaining the laws that were in the scripture. And then from there, they needed more, so they created the Talmud. And they created another 70 chapters of materials, I think he said it was 800 books, of what it means to keep the law. So now what it meant to work was you can't work on the Sabbath, and so all of a sudden it got to the place where you couldn't raise your leg up to, because that would be an effort and work. Then they limited it to some menial type of lifting that you could do. So my point is, men have a great tendency to complicate themselves and to make everything sound like it's definitive, rather than allowing God's value system to govern us. And that's what common law versus statutory law is all about. You know, English law used to be, and to some degree I guess still is common law, and we inherited that. But now, because people wanted everything to be secured and predictable and everything else, they did away with common law, which was a value system that the people all approved of, and they made it statutory law, and all of a sudden, now every dot and tittle has to be enacted in order for a law to be enforceable, and therefore the people, they are having to succumb to more and more, millions of these types of statutory laws. Or now it's regulatory agencies, you know, and you got all these laws that you're dealing with. So the moral code is shot. Statutory law has come in to take over, and you and I have been bound into a form of slavery because of it.
Right, I agree. I was commenting to somebody that made a comment that said, states' rights often means one or two wealthy families control an entire area. And my reply to that is I agree, but even that is better than one family controlling the entire nation. You know, so.
And I do, and I think I would add to that that even if that be the case, you can always get up and go to another state. You know, when you have 50 states that you could live in, you go there. There are people leaving New York right now because the taxes are too high. People who are leaving California right now because of the enormous tax burden out there. And they're going to other states like North Dakota and some to Florida and other places. And the reason is the burden on those states, on the people rather in those states, was too great. And then eventually, like right now up in New York, guess what they're doing? After all of their decades and really century and more of overtaxation of government, of corporations and individuals, they're now boasting that they are reducing their tax burdens for the companies. And they're giving them incentives to come into the state in order to produce jobs for the people. And that's pretty much what the Republicans had been saying for decades, and they reject it. But now they got themselves in so much trouble in New York that people are leaving, and it forces them to behave themselves. That's the difference when it comes to states having the ability to decide things on their own. But if you have a federal government, see, we can protect ourselves by leaving, or by staying but forcing them to recognize that they are losing populations because of their flawed laws. But we have a federal government, and they're mandating everything for the 50 state through the Supremacy Clause. You can't do that. There's nowhere to escape. And there's no way to stop them. And our Congress people won't stop them. That's why the Countermand Amendment is so terribly, terribly important for this generation. We've got to get this thing amended, and ratified, I should say, so that the people will, through their state legislatures, have the ability to say to the federal government, you went too far. We won't accept that mandate or that law or that court decision. We're rescinding it with 30 state countermands. Now, the federal government, with that kind of power in the states, won't look at the states as subjects to their federal mandates anymore. They'll look at the states as partners in government. And they'll learn to live with states that are always going to be the last resort, the final arbiters in constitutional matters, rather than the federal government. And keep in mind, too, Mike, that the federal government did not create the states. The states, and the nation states in 1787, created the federal government. And they reserved for themselves the ability to modify the conduct of the federal government through Article 5. It's pretty simple. And so they never surrendered their sovereignty that they had when they created the federal government. You see, all of the states at that time were nation states. They all saw themselves as independent nations more than they did part of a republic. And they didn't want to lose that. And so they had problems in the Articles of Confederation, which was before the Constitution, and that problem was it required unanimous consent from all the states before it can be amended. Well, the problem is one.
For some reason the audio went out. Are you still there? I show you still connected. We're not hearing you, though. Oh, you're back now.
Okay, all right. So I guess I was concluding that states need to retain their sovereign authority so they can exercise as a republic the countermands that can stop federal encroachment, which will force the federal government to treat them as partners in government rather than as subjects to federal mandates. So the countermand has so much wisdom in it. Actually, I would that the founders had inserted something like that in the Constitution to start, but always remember that the federal government was created by the states, and the states reserve to themselves in Article 5 a way to control the federal government when they get out of line and they get too big for their britches. And that's what the Countermand Amendment will do.
Alrighty, and we just had somebody ask that question, who created the, or who made the federal government. So, and I think you just answered that, the states did.
That's correct. They did, and the sovereignty they had in doing so was passed down to us in Article 5 and our ability to govern ourselves.
Okay. And I have a question. It might be a little bit left field here, but I really enjoy kind of picking your mind on this stuff. How close do you feel we are to the UN taking complete control over this nation?
Again, the question isn't the UN, it's sovereignty. Will we use it? The UN is obviously working very diligently through people like Obama to control the governmental structures of America. I do know and understand that there are financial groups, there are international monetary systems and one-worlders who are forming different ways in which an international one-world government can be run, that they're in place right now. But again, it goes back to sovereignty. The only way that they can be controlled is through our sovereign authority and we the people. The only way. So here's an example. Last year, the president and the Democrats tried to get through a treaty through the UN that would control arms sales between nations. Now, it very well be that much of that is good. That's not the point. They wanted to force it down our throats through the Senate, where Harry Reid was the controlling entity. And so what happened? It passed 100 and, I don't know, well over 100 nations that signed on. Almost all the nations, I understand. But at any rate, they passed it and they sent it to the Senate. And the president was trying to get it through the Senate. Well, it didn't pass. But let's assume that it did, because it would have altered our Second Amendment. You see, the president knows, and the Democrats know, that treaties can alter the rights we have in the Constitution. And so they have developed this strategy in order to avoid having to make statute laws that would get what they want. And so here, this thing failed. But had it not failed, we literally would have had a Second Amendment totally different from what it is now. If there were a Countermand amendment as part of the Constitution through the sovereign people who initiated it, we the people, then the states could have countermanded and rescinded that treaty. That's how powerful the countermand is. And that treaty would have been rescinded. Now the government would have probably tried to do something different, but they all know every time they make a law or a Supreme Court ruling or a congressional statute or an executive, they know that with the countermand ratified, that it could be rescinded. So they will make those laws more amenable to the states. And that means that our personal rights and state rights will be protected better. So this balance between the federal government, even international organizations, and our sovereign authority is right at the core of this issue that we're talking about today. Now, when we think about the police forces that the UN is, I think in June they're supposed to have some 9 states or something that are going to be populated with UN troops or UN police officers, which is nuts. They create the problem, these Democrats. They make it sound like the Republicans made it worse, and the Christians especially, and then they offer solutions, and then they're mindless and clueless followers who vote for them. They just get all excited, and they hate us, and they love them, and it's all based on lies. And then they become history. They become the heroes because they provided a solution, when in fact the solution gets us into more trouble. So what we're doing is we're not using God's laws. We're not using His righteous values. We're using things that will get votes for the purpose of buying votes to keep us in power. And I'm talking now about the people that use these tactics in government. But the Countermand Amendment can stop that. We can actually force all parties to behave themselves with the Countermand Amendment. And we won't need 50 states to do it. We'll just need 30.
Right. And now is this, and I think maybe you answered this earlier, but I want to clarify, even if it's just for myself. Is this the same thing, or is this something different than the Convention of the States?
Convention of States is totally different. And I do know Michael Farris. I know Rob Nadelson well. He's their top constitutional lawyer. I don't know Meckler, but I know him through a third party, and I've known them for years. And they opted for the idea that Article 5 is a constitutional convention. Now, they didn't, at first they alluded to it, and then because of us, they started to change their thinking. They began to see it not as a constitutional convention, even though they call it that even till this day. But the fact is, they modified it by saying, well, it's for a topic, and then they changed that to it's a subject. And so today they have 3 subjects: fiscal policy, that they believe the delegates will debate at the convention; fiscal policy, reining in government, and also term limits. Now here's the flaw in their strategy. because they've made a flawed assumption that it's a constitutional convention, they believe that the delegates who go are autonomous to the degree that they will focus on a general area, a general subject, and that somehow they can be controlled. I don't know how they can control 535 politically charged delegates, 55 California, 5 from Wyoming, and so forth. I don't know how they control that, and they don't even have a controlling document. They have no pre-approved text. So what will happen is the convention will start, if they ever get to that convention. I don't think they will. I don't think they'll get 34 states. The states are beginning to wake up to their... One state has already said, you know, thank you for coming by, Charles, because you taught us how really to properly use Article 5, and they rejected COS, and now they're using us, and they're advancing us in the legislature as we speak. But the fact is that here you have, let's say, reigning in government. So you got these 535 politically charged delegates, unelected, unaccountable. They don't have to answer to the legislature even. And they're sitting there, and they're going to decide what reigning in government means. And so you got all of these different diverging views, and they are determined to make sure that they get their way. And so out of that reigning in government, let's assume that they come up with a concept that everybody is agreeing to, which is almost impossible. They then have to decide what it means, how to apply it. So they'll probably have 12 or 24 different sub-subjects under that general subject. Does reigning in government mean the Supreme Court or the lower courts or the executive? Does it mean the agencies? Does it mean the financial institutions, the non-government institutions, Congress? What does it mean? Now you've got these delegates, unelected, unaccountable, politically charged, debating every one of those 12 or 24 different issues that they want to... And then after that, they probably will have another 12 under each one of them that they will have to debate in order to come up with a concept that they all approve of, and then they have to write an amendment. And now the amendment has to reflect what they've come up with, and it's almost certainly not going to be acceptable to 38 ratifying states. Now, they have to do that with not only reigning in government, then they have to go to fiscal policies, they have to analyze it in the same way there, then they have to analyze it in the same way with term limits. The idea starts out with a flawed assumption that it's a constitutional convention, and in their case, it's a modified form of a constitutional convention because they are saying that they can have some control for safety reasons through subjects. Now, on the other hand, they also believe that the convention will be safely conducted based on convention experience, which goes back before 1787. There were about, Madelson tells us, there were about 30 conventions that the nation states had to resolve issues between themselves. Most of them didn't always work, or many of them didn't always work, but the fact is, they say that they will understand those concepts and those procedures, and these delegates will adopt those, and they will wind up having some rules to follow. Then they also believe that legal precedents with the Supreme Court up through the present will have a bearing on how the delegates will conduct themselves. And then they also look at historical events, and they wind up adopting, they expect the delegates to adopt certain precedents that have come out of those historical events, all legal precedents, the purpose for which is to assure that the COS convention will be conducted properly. In my opinion, it's all nonsense. I think they've sold us a bill of goods that's terribly dangerous. It surrenders sovereign authority and we the people in state legislatures. I surely don't want 535 politically charged delegates to decide the future course of my constitutional republic. I don't want to surrender my sovereign authority through the electoral process for my state legislatures to these delegates who are independent of who I elected. And so I oppose their opinion, their position, and when we get a chance to talk to the legislatures and legislators, they almost always come our way. And they realize that that's not the answer that we need right now. And on top of that, it could take years. It could take a couple of years before they get through the process. And if anything came out of it, it would be a miracle that the states would ratify it. And then also they have another problem, and that is, even if they get 34 applications from the states for the COS convention. Now they have to get past Congress. Now, Congress really is the facilitator. They don't control the Article 5 process, contrary to what most of these states, Article 5 groups advocate. Congress is the facilitator that provides a manageable process from application to ratification. And everything in between that denies sovereign authority in the legislatures is nonsense. But they do have one legitimate role, and that is they have to protect the Constitution. And so when they look at Article 5, they will see that twice the founders put in there for proposing amendments. And they will then ask the question, well, is COS proposing amendments? And the answer to that is no. There is no pre-approved text for the amendment. There's not even the word amendment. It's a subject, general subjects, which will result in dozens and dozens of subsubjects. And so they will probably look at that and say, look, what you're trying to do is have a wholesale change to the Constitution without defining how that change will take place. And we cannot condone your application, and we reject it. They probably will reject it. But even if they get it, then they've got this other issue of getting it through the convention. And if they ever come up with a text on the three areas that is manageable, then they have to deal, because of the political nonsense that's going to be at the convention, just like at the Constitutional Convention, so they have to decide how it's going to vote and so forth. So the fact is, then they have to get it ratified. And then 38 states have to ratify it. It's going to be a very hard job for them. And they wanted me to join them. I was asked over 2 years ago, when they first got started, if I would become part of their executive team. One of their top lieutenants and directors had called me, the executive director, and I said to him, so-and-so, I said, let me ask you two questions before I give you an answer. Are you willing to endorse a pre-approved text for the amendment by the state legislatures before it goes to the convention? And he said no. And I said, well, would you pre-approve a delegate resolution by the legislatures to bind the delegates at the convention? And he said no. And I didn't care what he offered me. I couldn't accept it, because my biggest concern is that we as a nation and as a people retain our sovereign authority, and we the people not giving it away to anybody, not to Congress, not the Supreme Court, not to the governor, not to delegates, and they don't believe that. They believe that that authority actually is in the delegate, and that is because they think it's a constitutional convention, and they don't believe that it's for amending the Constitution only. And so as a result, they have drawn conclusions that I believe are very dangerous.
Alrighty, I have a question, and I don't know if you had answered this previously or not, but you were talking about, okay, you know, with the, I'm getting words confused. I'm making sure I get this accurate. Okay, with Article 5, okay, you were saying it takes one vote per state. Now, my question is, let's say, you know, we take this vote and it all goes forward. Who is it that represents that state?
Okay, before I try to answer that, Mike, I just want to remind the audience, whoever might be out there, that they can learn more about our effort by going to countermands.us. That's Countermands with an S, COUNTERMANDS.us. And send us in the contact form information about yourself, how you can help us. Would you like to be a state director? We have multiple state directors in the states, and we would love to have you join us. There's much work that has to be done in the state with events as well as in the legislatures, and you certainly can have part in history. This is the most important constitutional event in history, that is since the 1787 convention, and you have a chance now, an opportunity now to be part of it. So please go there. You can also order a copy of my book, The Countermand Amendment, The Missing Piece in the Article 5 Puzzle, and you'll get a lot of this information in there that you've never heard before, because no one has ever taught it to you. So now, Mike, give me a handle on that question again.
Okay, what my question is, okay, let's say that the states take their vote and this moves forward to enact Article 5. Who is it from each of the states that will go forward and represent that state?
All right, there's been a lot of mischief done with this issue as well. I was sitting in a senator's office in Alabama last year, and I was reviewing the process that took place from the Annapolis Convention to the new Constitution, because the John Birches and others, they claim that there was a usurpation of power by the delegates from the Annapolis Convention, and the Constitutional Convention was never authorized. And I mean, it's a lot of mush that is based on poor scholarship, to be honest, and yet it's been controlling things for 40 years. So I'm sitting there and I'm talking to him, and I explained to him that Hamilton and Madison, after the Annapolis Convention failed, and that convention's purpose was simply to solve problems, that commerce problems and other problems that they had between the states in a very limited way, and that the states at this convention would address them and try to amend the Articles of Confederation. But they failed because only 5 states sent representatives, delegates. So they wrote an update, and they reported back to the Confederation Congress, and they said that we cannot conduct business because we don't have a quorum, and we request that you summon delegates from the states to a convention, to the Annapolis Convention really, that will allow us to examine all of the exigencies of the Articles of Confederation dealing with the problems we're having in the states, because we don't want to lose the revolution that we had fought so hard to gain. And Congress agreed. And then Congress sent an invitation to the state legislatures requesting that they send delegates to the Annapolis Convention to examine all of the exigencies. Now, as a result of this, Congress summoned 73 delegates representing the members of Congress in the 13 states. That's the formula. And so when the summon went out, and I told him that it was 73, he said, "What did you say?" The senator said this to me. He said, "I'd never heard that before." I said, "Well, that's how the process works. The Congress will decide how many delegates will be summoned, and the states will decide how many they want to send. They may want to send one or as many as are summoned. That will be up to the states. But the fact is, it was 73, and Congress was really obliged to summon 73 because that was the number of members in Congress in both houses from the states. And so today we have 535 members of Congress, and that's how many Congress will summon to the Countermand Amendment Convention. And the states who can send all of that they're allowed. In California's case, they will, because their population allows them to have 55 delegates, meaning 55 members of Congress. And Wyoming will be limited to 4 or 5, and South Dakota, and North Dakota, and on and on and on. You just have a few, but that's all they get, because that's all they have in their population representing members of Congress. So now you have these 535 who are going to go to this convention, and they're going to go unbound, if you listen to these Constitutional Convention arguments, and they will go having to decide this very issue on how to vote. It doesn't matter how many the states wound up sending, they're going to have a big battle. And whatever the issue is, the 55 from California and the 40 from New York and so forth, they're going to outdo the people who are in the smaller states. And so they're going to rule the convention. And that's because they do not understand the importance of a republic, that every state has to be treated equally as one vote. So if you have a delegate resolution that literally contracts with your delegates, including criminal penalties, and it tells those exactly how to organize the convention and how to vote at the convention, and a simple majority at the convention, that it has to be a Republican form of convention. When you have those things in place in the delegate resolution, it does not matter how many delegates California sends.
because every state will have a delegation with one vote as called for in the delegate resolution. And when 26 or more states complete that same or similar delegate resolution for the Countermand Amendment Convention, now the population of the states are irrelevant, because every state will wind up with one vote. You see, you have to force the issue. You can't just do it because you're a nice guy. There are people right now trying, legislators who are trying to come up with a formula. They've been doing this for over 2 years, since the Mount Vernon Assembly. And that was a late comer, because, again, I had been in this thing for 40 years at that point, and they're over here trying now to figure out how delegates should be selected and appointed and on and on and on. Well, it's already been determined. It's already in our history. It's in our constitutional structure. And so this guy jumped across the table at me. He said, "What did you say, 73? How did you?" He said, "I've never heard that before. Tell me that again." So I explained it to him again. It's the number of members in Congress, and that will be the formula today. He said, "Wow, I hadn't heard that." So, and he's sponsoring us in Alabama. But the point is that you cannot go to Congress ordering or applying to Congress to convene at the Countermand Amendment Convention. And by the way, when 34 states complete the application, it's no longer an application, it's now a mandate, because now Congress has to convene the convention. It's a single issue convention. The amendment is already predetermined. Congress has no reason to see ambiguity, and they have to complete it. And if they don't, then the states will be able to convene the convention on their own. But it'll always be under this Constitution an amendment convention. And so Congress will, yes, they'll summon the 535, but the states will be in control. But they won't be in control unless they have a delegate resolution. And so these other groups that have been trying to figure out a way to control the number of delegates independent of their history and what the Confederation Congress did at Annapolis are really off base. They don't understand that it's not even an issue of how to do it. We already know how to do it. The states need now to know how to control it. And that's what our delegate resolution does. It tells them that they're in charge. They determine the amendment. They determine the agenda at the convention. They even determine the outcome of the vote, because every state has one vote. If you get 26 or more states on any vote, you win. So that's how the system has to work if it's going to be safe and if it's going to be without mayhem. It can never be a constitutional convention, but it can result in mayhem, and whereby the delegates will go nuts, and you'll get all of the different factions that we have today, especially in the Democratic Party, but also now in the Republican Party, arguing but if you have a republic with every state as elected representatives in their legislatures with one vote, deciding that this is the delegate resolution that their delegates will be bound by, now you have a manageable process through Congress, through the convention, and through the ratification. And we can win. We can restore our republic this way. But that's part of the problem, educating these legislatures to know how to do that. So folks, go to countermands.us and learn more about us. Order a copy of my book, and I think you'll learn that there are some very positive aspects in our future if we will just properly use the Constitution and Article 5.
Right on, and I've been given that link out in the chat room, and I show we have like 12 minutes left. We do have a caller if you'd like to take that.
Yes, I'd be glad to.
All righty, and this is a familiar individual. He's one of the moderators on our YouTube. So Rage Wolf, you're on. Be good.
Me? Bad? No. Yes, sir. I was wondering about your Article 5 and how would that play with the 10th Amendment, where it states that the powers that are not dictated to the federal government are to be given back to the people. Isn't that kind of how that's supposed to work? Does that work with each other, or do they conflict with each other in any way?
No, there's no and your name, please?
Huh?
What was your name?
I'm Rage Wolf. I'm a moderator on the
I just
chat.
didn't want to say, hey, you. Ray, you said, though, right?
Yeah, Rage.
There is no conflict. As a matter of fact, it's a perfect complement. Let me explain why. Amendment 9 and Amendment 10, yes,
they allow certain rights to be retained by the people and or the states. And that's what Madison said. He said the federal powers are are defined and few, well-defined and few, but all the others are assigned to the states. But the problem that the states have had, Ray, over the last 200 years, they have not known how to identify those unenumerated rights in the 10th Amendment and to codify them. So that's one of the big problems with nullification. Nullification is the idea that you just tell the government you're not going to listen. Problem is you can't win, because the federal government can coerce you into doing what they want, and or they can do it by force, and because of the supremacy clause. But you see, when you nullify an act of the federal government, you're really at the government's mercy, and you stand alone. Now, you may get some other states to join you, but you're not going to get enough to overturn the government. So if you countermand that particular law or ruling, whatever it is, which is a form of nullification, you're literally saying to the federal government, we are countermanding it, we are resisting it, we are telling you you're not going to encroach any further on us. When you countermand that law, and 30 states join with you in that law, it's now rescinded. Now, once it's rescinded, it becomes a constitutionalized, unenumerated right in the 10th Amendment, automatically. Because now the states with the countermand will have a way to identify their unenumerated rights and define them and to protect them in the 10th and 9th Amendment.
Okay. Now I understand some of what you're saying here, but I believe that these are God-given rights, and I am a sovereign man born of this earth, and they don't have the right to tell me what I can and cannot eat, or who I should or should not pray to. Now, couldn't they use the same very power to do the opposite of good? Couldn't just one man use it to be evil? And is there a check or balance to this system?
You mean the countermand system?
How does your proposed idea, or the idea which you're talking about, how is that controlled under checks and balances?
Well,
to protect the minority from the majority and vice versa.
Right, and I believe it's going to be quite comfortable for you to hear, because it does exactly that. It protects. Remember, the biggest issue at the Constitutional Convention was trying to strike a balance between the sovereign rights of the states and the formation of a federal government under a constitutional structure that would protect and provide for the states. And there was a constant battle between the two. And they came up with the three branches of government, which now is out of control. But the fact is, they came up with the structure that we have today. They thought that would be adequate. Well, unfortunately, our people fell asleep. So we recognized Citizen Initiatives, the group that sponsors the Countermand Amendment. We recognize that the federal government has a legitimate role. We recognize that the states have a legitimate role. And we recognize that there is a certain check that comes from countermands. If 30 countermands are realized, that's a check on federal power. At the same time, it doesn't take one state to countermand and rescind. It takes 30. So if you get 30 votes from the states, now you're literally letting the federal government know they went too far on their encroachment, and you're stopping them. And now that law that they had is now rescinded, so they can't enforce it anymore. But no one man could make that happen. It can only happen through 30 or more states. And it can only happen through the elected representatives in the state legislatures. So you've got 7,000 legislatures over the country that are going to deal with every issue that is going to be looked at as a possible countermand. And
my problem with what you're saying is at one point, through amendment, they made the sale, the production, and the usage of alcohol illegal. And then through the very same process, they made it re-legal again, but they didn't just use prohibition on alcohol. They prohibitioned many things at that time. And they only gave us back alcohol through taxation. Now we have to pay a tax, a sin tax per se. So,
well, that's a different issue. That's when you are taking the initiative for the purpose of addressing a specific grievance that some people in the society want to protect or to prevent from being violated. That's different from what we're talking about.
The idea of the preamble at all, where or the Constitution is here to provide prosperity and unity between the states and help with commerce and all the other good things that the preamble named, or is it under a special set of? Is there a control to the whole system that you're talking about?
The control is 30 states. That's the control. Now, let's take a Supreme Court ruling. Remember, the reason for the Supreme Court rulings being enforceable on the states is because of the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution. That Supremacy Clause simply requires that the states obey the federal government when any law or ruling is mandated. Now, the Supreme Court has been getting away with this for 200 years. And what they do is this. They like this recent decision with same-sex marriage. There were scores and scores of states that had made laws and constitutional amendments to protect traditional marriage. And these 9 yo-yos decided, I guess 5 of them, or 6, I don't know how many, I think it was 5, decided that was unconstitutional. In essence, what the Supreme Court has learned how to do is to amend the Constitution without ratification by the states. That's what they did with this decision, and Roe versus Wade, and a whole host of others. And they used the Supremacy Clause to beat us down. And as a result, the states and the citizenry have no recourse. And that's the evil that the Supremacy Clause represents. Now, with the Countermand Amendment in place, the Supremacy Clause will not be lost. It's still there. The Supremacy Clause is not going to be denied the Supreme Court. But when the Supreme Court makes a decision, they will take into account the fact that with the Countermand Amendment already ratified, 30 states could rescind even that decision in the courts if it encroaches on their states' rights. And so now you've got the protection of the court with the Supremacy Clause, and if it's a proper decision for the purpose of protecting our states and people, it probably will never be countermanded. On the other hand, if it's an offense, and it really is denying us our freedoms, then it can be rescinded, and the court will know that. And every decision by the Supreme Court or Congress or the EPA or the BLM or the Department of Interior or the IRS, or it doesn't matter what the agency, the Congress, everyone, they will realize that they have to balance their decision in light of the fact that the states now have a way to check them from encroaching beyond a certain point that is intolerable to 30 or more states.
Now is this fifth Article 5, as you're talking about, does this follow under natural law or our God-given rights of the constitutional law, common law as it's called, or does it work into statutory law, maritime law as it's known as?
It works on everything. The fact is that it's to protect our inalienable rights and our constitutional rights. It in no way changes the Constitution. It just stops the federal government from misusing the Constitution or abusing it. And therefore, whatever the federal government does that is a denial of our states' rights, doesn't matter if it's the courts or, again, the EPA, Congress, statutory, just executive order, treaty, it doesn't matter. Non-government mandates such as the Treasury Department. If 30 or more states say, hey, you have created a problem that really is making this nation fall into a pit, it's rescinded. And that means that the government will learn how to respect the states as partners in government rather than as subjects to federal mandates.
Well, thank you. I'll hold at that, and from what I've been told, we have another caller. If the boss would like to put him on, I'll yield and listen.
Right on.
Okay.
Yep, we got a couple minutes left. Go ahead, area code 503.
Hi.
Hello.
Charles, is it right?
Yes, it is.
First, I'd like to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Next, I truly believe in Article 5 from what you said, although I think it's failed, and that's because of the corruption and the state of affairs we're in. What I'm looking for here is hope. Is there still a way we can stop the government from breaking the law? You know, they break the law all the time on their own.
Right, and yes, this is what the Countermand Amendment is for.
But how can it work when it works within the government with politicians that are corrupt?
Well, but you're talking about two different areas. You're talking about state authority through legislatures elected by state, we the people. Or,
but you're also talking about Supreme Judges, Congress. The Congress are politicians.
Yeah, but I think what you're doing is you're missing the point that I'm trying to share here. The Countermand Amendment under Article 5 will stop the federal government from encroaching on states' rights and personal liberties. When 30 states agree that a particular law or ruling is burdensome to the states, it's rescinded automatically.
Yeah, but from what you said, it's not the states, it's the Congress members who go to vote from those states.
No, Congress has nothing to do with it. Article 5 is, the empowerment in Article 5 is through we the people and state legislatures. It is not through Congress. The federal government was created by the state legislatures in 1787.
Okay, from what Mike said, though, he asked you who from the government goes to vote.
Well, the voting will be, I'm not sure where you're going with your question, but the point is that the state legislatures with the Countermand Amendment or
just clarify state legislatures.
They are state legislators are people you elect to be part of your state legislature.
Yeah, but what branch in that are you talking about?
All of them. I mean, you could be Republican, Democrat, Senate, House. See, the legislature will decide.
I don't think I'm getting a correct answer. I thank you for your time, and I hope you do as much good as you can. And I really do respect you. I just I have a lot of thinking to do. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think his concern was that the same corrupt people that are in control now would still be the same corrupt people in control.
Well, the answer is, that's how we started this 2-hour session out tonight. There will always be people in all governments, state governments and federal governments, who in fact will be corrupt. But my experience over the last many, many decades has been that there are many, many honorable state legislators who are trying to find a way to protect our constitutional republic. When they hear about the Countermand Amendment, they see that they have the sovereign authority in Article 5 to restore our republic. But who are they restoring it from? They're preventing the federal government from encroaching on states' rights and personal liberties. So it's the state legislatures who are the ones in charge under the Countermand. And they are in charge through the sovereign authority that we the people give them. Now, we the people are going to have to be alert. And we're going to have to try to elect men and women in the legislatures that are honorable. That's going to be a never-ending task. But the tool, in order for the states, 30 out of 50, to stop federal encroachment on certain issues that need to be addressed, is going to be provided with the Countermand. And it'll be done by state legislators, not by federal Congress people or court decisions. The federal government will be subjects to the states under the Countermand.
Now, what happens? Oh, I have a question. What happens if let's say we send our legislatures in to represent us in this matter, and they do what a lot of them have been doing, and talking one thing and then doing something else? Is there anything we can do after that process has started to recall those particular legislators in order to get it, our voices heard?
Well, the Countermand Amendment is not going to be addressing that. You have the power of impeachment in each state, and you can initiate an impeachment process, which will be a very difficult task, for members in that state who are violating their oath of office. In many cases, they'll go through their term, 2 years, 4 years, whatever, and then they'll drop off, and then it'll be your job to keep them from being reelected. But the point is, the Countermand's purpose is not to do that. It's not a term limit thing. What it is, it's a method by which the states can force the federal government at all levels to behave itself and to respect the states. And in that, the federal government will be careful not to pass laws and rulings that are likely to be countermanded because of pushing it on the states. So they'll write laws and rulings in a way amenable to the states, and the state legislatures will have to measure whether that's acceptable to them or not. Now, I tell you, I go into a legislature and I meet hundreds of legislators, and some of them are creeps. But many of them. I had one representative down in Florida, and when she started to hear what it is that we're doing, she simply said, because she didn't want to see me at first, or she couldn't see me at first because of some budget problems last year. And then she stopped me after I explained a few things, and she said, Charles, she said, you didn't come here to lobby me for something that you want. You didn't come here to lobby me for some group you represent. You came here to give me a tool so I can be a better state legislator to my people. And she says, boy, am I honored to know you. Thank you for coming. You see, that's what happens. They learn that they have a responsibility that goes beyond just politics. They're really statesmen. They just need to think like statesmen when it comes to Article 5 and the use of the Countermand Amendment.
Now I have a question, sir. How do I, as a Carolina country boy, per se, how would I use this tool to maintain a sense of checks and balances? How do I contact...
As a citizen?
Yes, a citizen.
Okay. We'll assume,
how do I use it?
We'll assume for the moment that it's been ratified. It's now a constitutional amendment that allows the states and the citizenry to use it. So on my state legislative roundtable, which I do not conduct now because I just don't have enough time, we used to have state legislators who we interviewed. We've had probably 70 or more. But at any rate, I had a man on who was our sponsor in North Carolina. And he and I are good friends. And he said, Charles, you missed something. I said, what is it? He said, well, and I'm kind of worried now because we're broadcasting and there are probably many thousands of people in the audience. Our biggest audience was like 50,000, so we were getting some good attention. But the fact is that he said, you missed something. And I said, uh-oh. And he said, right now, if one of my constituents comes to me, and this is now would be somebody like you, it comes to me with a complaint. Doesn't matter what it is, IRS, water use, land use, energy issues or whatever, education, and they come to me and they complain that there's federal encroachment and their rights are being violated, I can't do anything about it. I'm helpless because the Supremacy Clause controls the states. But on the other hand, with the Countermand Amendment in place, having been ratified, now my constituent comes to me and complains, and I can start the ball rolling. I can now serve my constituents effectively and properly. I can take his complaint, I can bring it to my Countermand Legislative Committee, we can introduce it for the purpose of starting a countermand, and once my state agrees that that law has to be countermanded, then my state will send out invitations to the other 49 states, to their countermand committees, and ask them to join for the reasons stated and so forth. There'll be some horse trading between the states.
So what you're saying is this is a more efficient way for the government or the politician to better address the grievances of the citizenry.
That's right, and it'll also allow you as a citizen, through your elected officials, to represent you with power.
Because I think that's part of the problem now with our system is that most of us, me being just a simple Carolina country boy, we don't know who to talk to, who we write laws or ask questions to write laws a certain way, or how it is to officially address our grievances, and this has become a problem. This is one of the reasons why they had that standoff in Oregon, because they didn't know how to properly address grievances.
That's correct. I've been asked to join that group before, and I said I can't. I'm in favor of what they're trying to do. I like what they're trying to do, but they're doing it in a way that's going to create other problems. And I can't do it in that way simply because I'm working with state legislators, and I need to retain a certain amount of respect from them in order to get this amendment passed. So, but what you just said, dealing with having and not having representation as a citizen, is the reason for the countermand. And when the ball is started, when you start the ball through your state legislator, one man, you go to him, maybe two, a senator and a representative, and you go to him and you say that we've got a problem and I'd like you to address it, and I'd like you to start a countermand on this because I think that other citizens are being hurt in the same way. Now, if he agrees and he goes, and then you also have control over him through the electoral process. if in fact he keeps putting you off and these issues don't get addressed, you can get him out of office. So you have that aspect of it. But the fact is, once he starts the ball rolling, now your complaint to protect your state's rights has been activated. And now, and you can help. We will be having, and started already, Countermand membership, Countermand state Countermand committees. They're citizens like yourself who will be joining certain committees in their state to address issues of encroachment on their state's rights and their personal liberties. And from there, you will have input to your state legislature. But the point is, it'll be a way for you to really make your legislatures, empower them to address issues that right now they're helpless to address, so as to protect your state's rights.
That's a more better, interesting way of putting it. Yes. See, my ideas probably would be to use this. I don't know if it would be for right or wrong, but maybe bind our state representatives, our elected officials, to a contract they would sign to actually reinforce their oath to office. That if they were to break it, there would be some real criminal actions to be taken there, instead of just impeaching them and removing them from office.
Well, you will have to fight that battle at the state level. Our primary purpose is to empower you and the state legislatures to fight federal encroachment.
Heard.
All righty. Well, I don't have any more questions myself. Do you, Rage?
No, sir. I was just trying to clarify some things up, play a little devil's advocate here it from both ends. That way, it made a little more sense to some people than others. I understand the concept completely, sir.
Okay, Barry, what state did you say you're in?
I'm in the Carolinas, sir. I'm in North Carolina.
Okay, so am I. Why don't you consider being one of our state directors in North Carolina? I'm going to be meeting with my state senator tomorrow for lunch. What part are you on the west? Let me rephrase that. Are you in western North Carolina or central?
Piedmont.
East?
It's in the Charlotte region.
Okay, you're a couple, 3 hours or 2.5 hours away from me. But at any rate, I would invite you to the meeting tomorrow that we're having with Senator Heights. He's one of our sponsors in the Senate. But give some serious thought to joining us. We are making this is the most important constitutional initiative since the convention itself in 1787. I am convinced of that. And if we lose this battle, I do believe we will lose our Constitution. The other groups are not even addressing these things. And they're doing it in ways that are only going to muddy up the whole issue of sovereignty in state legislatures and we the people. At any rate, give some thought to it. Go to countermands.us, hit the contact button, and tell me how you can help us, and if you'd like us to help you to become a state director and to help us in the legislature in Raleigh, you're welcome to do so.
I heard that. I copy.
All right? All right. Mike, anything else you need from me? We've gone over, and I'm tired, and I'm ready to go to sleep.
No, I think we covered it. I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, Ed, I'm always honored, and I'm glad that there are people like you out there trying to get the information out. And I certainly will. Either myself or one of our directors will be available to be on these programs at any time.
Right on, right on. I think the scripture put it well in Hosea 4, chapter 6. It's important for us to have knowledge.
It is. My people perish because of lack of knowledge, and I think it's in what? Micah?
That is, well, I don't know if it's somewhere else, but that is also Hosea 4, chapter 6.
Right, and that, Micah 4, I think it is, or Micah 6, verse 1, I think. Maybe it's 4, 6. Forgive me, but it's in Micah. At any rate, my people perish because of lack of knowledge, and here God had said that he had provided all the commercial blessings that they could possibly use, and they turned on them. He says, so now I'm going to turn on your children. Mm-hmm. And that's where we are today. Mike, one more thing and I'll close. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 3, Isaiah is warning the men of Israel. And he's telling them,
that they have violated their commitments to the Lord. They're worshiping false gods. They were even sacrificing their children, burning them in coals to worship Moloch and I forget the name of the other god now, but Amos, I think it was, not Amos, Ammonite, maybe it was. But at any rate, the fact is they were sacrificing their children. And so he says to them, if you do not repent, and if you don't turn from your evil practices and your idolatry, I'm going to pronounce 3 judgments on you. And he's warning them. He didn't do it to the women, he did it to the men. Why? Because the authority is in the man, contrary to what we think today. And the fact is, he says to the man, he says, if you don't repent, I'm going to, 1, take away your masculine strengths. And he lists in chapter 3, 11 male strengths that are needed for a strong family, a strong religious order, and a strong government. Then he says, I will also give you children to oppress you. That's always the consequence of an effeminate man and father. And then 3, he says, I'm going to give you women to rule over you. And that's the consequence, again, of the man being out of his place of authority. So that's where we are in America. And unfortunately, it doesn't have to be that way. And if we understand that, and our women, our Christian women especially, who understand God's purposes for men and women to provide a relationship that will in fact give us a strong moral foundation in Christ, the fact is, if we understand that properly, we will have the foundations restored. But if we keep going in the way of this egalitarian nonsense that's destroying everything good and excellent, we will never see this Constitution restored. And the Countermand Amendment is the vehicle that I believe right now the Lord is giving us, maybe the last opportunity we're going to have to restore this Constitution in a way whereby the people can see the strength of God returning to this nation and becoming a God-fearing people again. Okay, I'm finished.
All righty. Well, thank you again.
And I wish you well, and I thanks Mike. Tell Kathy I'm sorry I missed her, and I trust that she'll be doing better. We'll be praying for her, and look forward to chatting with her soon, too.
Okay, will do.
Goodbye, Mike.
All right, goodbye. All righty, Rage, you still there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Well, I think you got a job to do.
Hey. Okay, everybody in YouTube, go ahead and say something on the screen. That way you show up in active chat. I will start on the website chat first. First off, Happy Feet, nice to see you. Gangsta Giggles, D-Lead, Cajun Gemini, Mayhem, a Maritime Addict, Evil, Dizzy, and Boats. Anybody else? Did I miss anybody? I don't think I missed anybody in that chat. Hold on. Now the next one. Oi. And Alican, Clovis, Jennifer White, Malice, Poetic Justice, Arthright, and Watchman, you all gorgeous. And what is it, 56 of you that are watching now, watching from the YouTube without saying a thing? 50, 56, between that, any given number. Thank you all, and yet again, this show is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you, and God bless.
Right on, Rage. Thank you, brother. Oops, sorry. I cut him out right as... Sorry, I didn't mean to do that, brother. He went silent, so I thought that meant he was already off.